Hi guys, welcome back to Plot Portal, a podcast that delves into the beautiful plots and worlds of the TV, film, book stories that we know and love. So we are on to episode 3 of season 1, and in case you're new here, in season 1 we are delving into the Harry Potter HBO TV series that is due to come out in 2026. It has been confirmed, literally like as I'm filming this week it's been confirmed that it will be coming out in 2026, which is really exciting that we're learning more about it. Basically, yeah, they're going to be turning the Harry Potter stories into a TV series. It said that it'll probably be a season per book. And so basically, in this podcast, I am going through the books, the Harry Potter books, and looking at what key plot points, what like sort of moments were missed out from the films that we hope they include in the upcoming HBO series. If HBO are saying they're going to be staying truer to the books and give us all the detail that the films couldn't because of time constraints, then we're basically sort of putting that to the test and really raking through the books, looking at what differences there were in the films, things that they added from the books, things that they just completely ignored, things they changed. We're looking at all of them and sort of debating, discussing what we think they should do in the upcoming HBO series. So we are on to episode 3, which means that we're now looking at the Chamber of Secrets. The first 2 episodes were looking at Philosopher's Stone. They had to be split into 2 parts because there were so many. I think that's probably going to be the format for most of the season. It'll probably be about 2 episodes per book. Yeah, so for today's episode, we are going to be starting to look into Chamber of Secrets. If you're enjoying this podcast, please make sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the future episodes. So the first thing we're going to look at in Chamber of Secrets is a start whilst Harry is still at the Dursleys. So he goes all summer and he hasn't heard from his friends. He meets Dobby. Most of all of that is the same in the books as it is in the films. They don't really miss out much. Only a little bit of difference would be how long the Masons are there. In the films, the Masons are only there in the evening, whereas in the books, the Masons are there like all day. So that's just only one little difference. Nothing, that doesn't really change the plot or what happens or anything, so that one doesn't matter too much. But one of the first sort of actual key differences we start to see is when the Weasleys come to save Harry, because Harry's not been replying. They're like, right, something is up, and Ron and the Weasley twins go to save him. They go in the car, rescue Harry. Now this happens in the films and in the books, but it's different how it happens in the book. So firstly, Harry is dreaming, and in his dream he starts to be rescued and wakes up and realises it happening, so his dream leads on to that scene. That's only a minimal difference, but a big one that I actually wish they had stayed true to in the films, and I hope they do in the series, is the Weasley twins actually pick the lock of the bars. They don't attach something and pull off the bars like they do in the films. They use like muggle magic, oxymoron, muggle magic, but they lockpick. They have to pick the lock. And I actually love that moment because it shows the nature of the Weasleys again. It shows their fascination with muggle life. It shows that they don't rely, they use a lot of magic, but they don't rely on it. It just shows like a nice side to them, that they appreciate that there are things in the muggle world that are useful, that are quite fun. So that's quite nice. But also, Fred and George have to actually go into Privet Drive. They have to go into the house to get Harry's stuff. In the films, Harry conveniently has all his stuff in his room and throws it all into the car through the window. Whereas in the books, all of his trunks, his books, everything are all downstairs in the cupboard under the stairs in his old bedroom, because he now is in Dudley's old second bedroom. So Harry's in a different room. Yeah, Fred and George have to actually go into Privet Drive, into the house, to bring up all the stuff, and that might not seem like it matters, but it's just higher stakes. Like, it's higher stakes that they have to, you're like holding your breath in that scene in the books, because you're like, oh my god, surely they're going to be heard, surely Vernon and Petunia will wake up. Like, it really hires the stakes, and it's more of this build up of heard Vernon grunt, oh no, heard him snore, all that sort of thing. Like, it really ramps up the tension more, and it's like a bigger scene. So I hope they include that just to make it a little bit more exciting, a little bit more like, oh, they're gonna get caught. Another little thing actually that I just brushed past about Harry having a different bedroom. I did actually address this in episode 2, I think it was, or episode 1, about the fact Harry suddenly has a bigger room. And I said in the other episode, like, that's just so out of character for the Dursleys to give him a bigger bedroom, and this is explained in the books. It's because the letters to no one. So again, yeah, but for us watching the films, that only comes in from Chamber of Secrets because he's suddenly in the bigger bedroom, but again there's no explanation as to why. So if they can put that explanation in the first season, straight into the second season, Chamber of Secrets season, knowing, cool, we understand why that's the situation. Something else that's missed out in the films is the de-gnoming. When Harry gets to the burrow, love the burrow, I really hope that, I don't know how they're going to depict it, because in my head the burrow is just the burrow, how it's pictured in the films, so the idea of it looking any different, like, they could probably have a lot of fun with that in the series, to be fair. But one of the things that they miss out in the films is the de-gnoming. So in the books, Harry gets to the burrow, and basically Molly, as a punishment for them going out to use the car, basically makes them all go out and de-gnome the garden, because basically their garden gets infested with gnomes, with little gnomes, almost like gnome ornaments, but they're actual creatures, they're alive, grumpy, walking around. And so we get firstly introduced into a different character, a different creature, but then this whole activity, they all have to go out and basically pick them up and whirl them, throw them over the fence. And it's just such a fun, interesting scene. Just seeing that, just extra sort of normal aspect of their magical life, getting a glimpse into what it's like just to be in the wizarding world. It doesn't always have to be things that are pivotal to the plot. I think that's the thing with the TV series, because they have more time, they can add in, I don't want to say filler scenes because we don't want them to be filler scenes, but they can add in just a little bit more detail, make it a little bit more immersive, get us to get closer to the characters, closer to the world, and really go into those more intricacies and make it all feel real. They will be able to do that more because it's a series. So things like that de-gnoming scene is so fun. And it's just quite funny, Harry's got this little inner battle, he feels really bad, throwing these gnomes, but actually, they're really horrible, they, bite him, all that sort of stuff. So I just really love that scene, and I hope they include that in the HBO series. Then when they all go to Diagon Alley and they use flu powder. It's the first time we're introduced into flu powder. Flo powder, I never know whether it's flu or flow. And Harry says diagonally, because he just apparently decides he doesn't remember how to speak. Whereas in the books, the actual reason why he just says it completely wrong is because he swallows a load of ash. He knows it's Diagon Alley. He knows that. He doesn't mistake it for diagonally like he does in the films. He just swallows a load of ash and gets all choky because all the flame goes up. And so he just says it wrong. So yeah, again, that's just a little thing they changed in the films, didn't really need changing. So I just hope they just sort of stick true to all of that in the HBO series. Harry ends up in Borgin and Burke's. And something that was missed out, it was filmed for the movies, but they deleted the scene, is Lucius and Draco go to Borgin and Burke's, and Lucius is basically trying to get rid of a load of dark artefacts because the Ministry are raiding people's houses and trying to basically catch people out with objects they shouldn't have. And yeah, as I said, this was filmed and is a deleted scene that you can find online of Harry ends up in Borgin and Burke's by accident from the flu powder, and then he's sees Lucius and Malfoy, and so hides. He has to hide in Borgin and Burke's in a cabinet, which is the first little inkling we get to the vanishing cabinet as well. He hides in a cabinet, doesn't close it fully, hence why he doesn't end up getting transported, because that could have been awkward if he'd have although he'd have ended up in Hogwarts nice and easy then. Hang on, could that have been another way to get to Hogwarts? Don't worry about the Hogwarts Express, about flying, about using a car. Wouldn't have, oh my god, in Chamber of Secrets they wouldn't have had to fly in the Ford Anglia. They could have just gone in the vanishing cabinet. Job done, got to Hogwarts. But anyway, I digress. But yes, also we there get again a little bit more insight into Lucius Malfoy. That is actually the first time we meet Lucius Malfoy. In the films, the first time we meet him is in Flourish and Blots. I always forget the name. That's the first time we meet Lucius, when he waltzes in and all of that. Whereas in the books, the first time we meet Lucius is Harry eavesdropping when they come into Borgin and Burke's. But it immediately gives us more of an insight into him because he's being shady. He's trying to get rid of these things that he doesn't want the Ministry finding. So it immediately captures our attention. It's what's he hiding? He's clearly not a good person. He's clearly dabbling in the dark arts. So it gives us more insight into Lucius's character. I mean, don't get me wrong. In the books, we can tell straight away he's a not very nice person, but it just gives that little bit extra, more detailed, solid proof of yeah, there's something shady going on with him. So I hope that they stay true to that and how we meet Lucius in the HBO series. I hope they stick to the books there. And then Harry finally gets out of Nocturne Alley. That's all sort of the same as in the films. Hermione doesn't fix Harry's glasses. So in the film, Harry runs into Hermione, and Hermione's like, oh, let me fix that for you, and Oculus Reparo fixes it. However, this is actually a major plot hole, because underage wizards aren't supposed to do magic outside of Hogwarts. And there is Hermione in Diagon Alley, which is outside of Hogwarts, doing magic, which is just illegal. So that's actually a major plot hole that the film brings up by making her be the one to fix Harry's glasses. Because in the books, it's actually Mr. Weasley who does it. Harry finds the Weasleys again after going off piece, and it's Mr. Weasley that fixes his glasses for him, therefore completely avoiding that plot hole. So I hope HBO make sure they pay attention to those details and make sure they get it right in how it's in the books to avoid any plot holes. Then the Weasleys, Hermione and everyone go into Flourish and Blots. They meet, that's where they meet Lockhart. Harry gets all the free books and everything. One little thing in the books that is, again, completely missed out in the films, but I, again, think it's another one of those key things. It's like a key character development sort of trait. It's basically that in the films, Mrs. Weasley just takes all those free books Harry gets, just takes them off him to go and get them signed for him. And I remember watching the films and thinking, Harry, no, surely, like, give it to them, let them keep it. Like, they are struggling for money, she has loads of kids, let them keep it. I remember it was like screaming at the TV, like, why? Like, surely he would have given it to them. That would be a Harry thing to do. And it is, because he does do that in the books. He gives all of those books, because Lockhart gives him the full collection for free. Harry gives them all to Ginny. He gives all of those books to Ginny, as he would, like, as is a Harry thing to do. I love that. And in the films, they're just like, no, he doesn't do that. And I always think, like, it's such a big, like, part of his character and who he is that he would do that. And the fact that it just shows him not bothering about that. I'm just like, no, like, that's not what Harry would do. Harry loves the Weasleys. The thing that always annoys me with the films, and then when I read the books, because I did read the books after the film, I was like, yes, I knew it. So yeah, I do hope they stay true to that in the HBO series. And then also, whilst they're all at Flourish and Blots, the other key difference is, so yes, Lucius and Arthur have a standoff in the films, which is accurate, but not fully. In the books, they have a full-on fight. Yeah, they fully, fists are thrown, it's Arthur that initiates it, full-on fight. And I think it's brilliant, because it's like, yes, Mr. Weasley, you get him, you go, because like, then Lucius gets up, he's all flustered, like, it's like, yes! So, that's something I want them to include in the series, showing Arthur giving Lucius a piece of his mind. I hope they keep to that, rather than just a little standoff like, no, full-on fight, please. Then we have minimal differences, you know, they go to King's Cross, barrier stops. I always think, why did both of the parents go in? Like, surely they'd wait, but anyway, that's just more about the story rather than like a plot hole or difference. So firstly, with the car, in the film, Harry falls out the car and is hanging out the car. That doesn't happen in the books. Whereas the car journey is actually much more just normal. Nothing really goes wrong. There is the whole invisibility booster thing, so that's all accurate, but he doesn't fall out the car. I understand why the films added that in. I don't think it's like, I don't mind, actually. That's one thing they added and changed that I actually didn't mind. It does work in the films, because I think otherwise that almost like little section scenario could have been a little bit boring if it's just them flying. Like, they need to add a little bit more excitement. I think what they'll do in the series, I don't think they'll include that them falling out the car, because that isn't in the book, so they would just be copying the films. And again, there's that whole piece about they need to make sure they don't just copy the films, otherwise what's the point in the series? So I don't think they will include that. I think they'll make a bigger deal about the invisibility booster. I think they'll show some muggles being like, oh, what is that? I think they'll make a bigger thing of that and do like a few hours later. Like, so that is one difference that the film made that, yeah, I think was fine. It was a fine difference for the film to add, but I don't think the HBO series need to add it. I think they'll make that whole thing a bit shorter and make the Howler longer, because the Howler in the books is much longer. It's not just like a few sentences, it is like, it goes on and on, so much so there's like just dots in the book, because Mrs. Weasley just goes on and on. And also the fact that Whomping Willow actually gets put into slings because of them bumping into it, crashing into it. It's probably more appropriate. The Whomping Willow Sprout actually puts into slings, and that you have more of those scenarios of when Lockhart's like, well, I could have done it, I know exactly the thing to save it, and all of that. There's more scenarios of that, and that's one of them. Like, Lockhart comes striding into the hall with Pomona, with, like, she's got all the slings in her arms, and he's like, well, I know just all of that. I think it would be quite funny to see the Whomping Willow in slings. I think that would be hilarious. So I actually do hope that they do that and, yeah, put that in, because that would be quite funny. Now, another sort of key difference. Now, this is a bit of a theme that is in all of the Harry Potter films, is that they dumb down Ron. I've mentioned this in a previous episode of some cases in Philosopher's Stone where this is shown, where Ron is, like, dumbed down. It's actually been said that the writer preferred Hermione, loved Hermione. Hermione was their favourite character. So they actively, for the films, they actively took lines off of Ron to give them to Hermione. And there's just, like, things like revelations, different things that Ron has in the books but is taken away from him and given to Hermione and other characters, which makes Ron, it just dumbs him down, and it makes him just seem like the funny one. He is so bright, he's so clever, he is funny as well, and he brings that humour, but he also is very clever. And I really hope they showcase that more in the HBO series. I think most people will want to see that, giving him a bit more of the spotlight, because it is part of his character that he's always, like, the second one to Harry. That is part of his character and what he has to come to terms with. So yes, of course, there's elements of that, but Ron still gets more of, like, spotlight and more of, like, what he's good at in his own right, different to Harry. And an example of this, and why I bring it up, is because in the Quidditch scene, when the Gryffindors go to practice and Slytherins are there, they see that Draco is now in the team and they all have the really good broomsticks. And this is the first time we hear about the word mudblood. Draco uses the word, and in the films, they go to Hagrid's hut. Harry's like, well, what's that word? And then Hermione goes on to explain, it's a foul word. She goes on to explain what it is. But in the books, it's Ron. Ron, whilst he's throwing up slugs, explains what a mudblood is. But they just take that off him and give it to Hermione. And not only it's like, oh, come on, let Ron have his moment, let Ron show his cleverness. Not only that, but it is also, again, actually a bit of a plot hole. Because why would Hermione know that when she didn't grow up in the wizarding world? She didn't grow up in the wizarding world. I know she's clever and she reads, but mudblood is more of like a slang thing. It's more of a thing that said it's probably not something she would have heard about. And in the book, she doesn't know what it is. In the book, she's literally like, I don't know what that word is. Can you explain it? In the films, she's the one that explains it. So it is also actually a bit of a plot hole. Because it's like, of course, Hermione probably wouldn't know. Because, yeah, she didn't grow up in the wizarding world. Same as Harry. Harry didn't grow up in the wizarding world. He didn't know what it was. But Ron does, because Ron grew up in the wizarding world. Of course, he would know what it is. He would have been told by his parents and everything. He'd have been told, like, never use this word, all of that. So that's one example of something they took off him and almost dumbed him down on. I hope they do Ron justice in the series. Now, for potentially one of the biggest differences between the Chamber of Secrets book and film is the Death Day party. Now, this is completely ignored in the films, but it's actually quite a big part of the books. So, in the books, Harry sort of befriends nearly headless Nick a bit more than we see in the films. And basically, he befriends him, he's talking to him. There's this whole thing about how nearly headless Nick hasn't been accepted into the Headless Hunt. It's very briefly mentioned in Philosopher's Stone in the films, but that's all. But it's talked about in much more detail in the books. It's this ongoing thing about nearly headless Nick being really upset because he can't join the Headless Hunt because his head is still attached to him. And Harry's like, oh, can I help you at all? Is there anything I can do? And then nearly headless Nick's like, actually, yes, you can come along to my Death Day party. And he's basically asking Harry to come because he knew the Headless Hunt would also probably go, and basically wants Harry to, like, vouch for him and be like, yeah, you should definitely let my friend join the Headless Hunt. It's on the same day as Halloween and the Halloween feast, so Harry is like, oh, I don't want to go, but it's like, no, I will, I'm gonna go, I'm gonna help nearly headless Nick. He brings Hermione and Ron along, and it's this whole thing, and they go, it's like in the dungeons and stuff, and there's all Hogwarts ghosts, Moaning Myrtles there as well. It's really fascinating. It gives us more of an insight into how the ghosts like operate. Like there's tables of like rotten, gone off food that the ghosts basically drift through. They like, you know, float over them. And they obviously don't actually ingest any of them, but because they let the food all go rotten and go off, because it makes them smell stronger, have a like be more pungent, which means they can sort of smell it and get a bit of a feeling from it more. Like, yeah, so that's why they let it go off. They let it go off, so it really smells, it's really pungent, and then they can actually, they feel like they can taste it and they can smell it. So Ron, Hermione and Harry go then. Ron's like, oh yes, there's food, great, I'm starving, goes over, and there's this cake with like maggots coming out of it. So it's actually quite funny and quite interesting. It tells a bit more about ghosts in the wizarding world, how they live, if that's the right word to use. And yeah, it's actually really fascinating, but they just completely take that scene out of the films. And I actually think it's upsetting that they do that. I think they should have kept it in because it's quite a big plot point. It actually also gives Harry an alibi for the first time anyone gets petrified, because it is directly after the Halloween feast and directly after the Death Day party that everyone finds Mrs. Norris being petrified. And also it's Harry that finds him, and then everyone comes along and sees Harry with Mrs. Norris, so they all think it's Harry. But then nearly Headless Nick comes along and is like, no, it can't have been Harry, because I know, because basically Snape then walks in and is like, actually, yeah, he wasn't at the feast. He wasn't at the Halloween feast, so it must have been him. But then nearly Headless Nick enters and is like, no, it can't have been him. He can't have done anything because he was at the Death Day party with me. So nearly Headless Nick backs Harry up, and it gives everyone more solid proof that it wasn't Harry. It's not just Dumbledore going, no, it can't have been him. That obviously is an element of it. They all know it can't be Harry because he doesn't have the ability to petrify people, but it's just an extra bit of solid evidence that it wasn't him. Yeah, so I actually think it's a real shame that they miss the Death Day party out in the films, because it really adds more connection to Harry and nearly Headless Nick. It makes them closer. There's a lot more between them in general in the books, and it actually makes a little bit more of a friendship between Harry and the Gryffindor ghost, and actually makes us as well a little bit more upset when nearly Headless Nick is petrified, or he's actually killed because he looks directly at the basilisk, but obviously he's a ghost so can't die. But yeah, it actually is like, oh, that is quite sad, because Harry and him were getting on really well and were friends. Because that's a whole chapter. It's a whole chapter called The Death Day Party, and and also in case you don't know, Death Day, it's basically like a birthday, but for the day you die. So all the ghosts in the wizarding world, they celebrate their Death Day party, and it's the day they died, so it's basically replacing their birthday. I really hope they include that in the series, because I think that could be really interesting to see how they approach that, how they set up that scene, because we've not seen it before, so we won't have any expectations. So it's one they could do quite well, because there's not anything to compare it to. Whereas with other things, for example, we will be able, however they decide to create Hogwarts, we'll be comparing to Hogwarts in the films. There'll be character scenes, all sorts of things where we're comparing it to the films, whereas the Death Day party wasn't done in the films. So that's straight away a whole scene they can do. There's nothing to compare it to, so I think it's one that will go down well and people will actually be quite like receptive to. Now that is the end of part 1 of the Chamber of Secrets films to books comparison, and looking at what we hope they include in the TV series. Now, as a little snippet of what we're going to look at in part 2, the first thing we're going to look into is the fact that Harry is actually the reason the Vanishing Cabinet breaks and becomes faulty. That's what we're going to look at first in part. So that is half of the things from the Chamber of Secrets book that were missed out in the films or changed in the films, and yeah, what we sort of hope they're going to include in the HBO series. We've got a lot more to go into in part 2, so make sure that you are subscribed so you don't miss that. I think, again, with Chamber of Secrets, similarly to Philosopher's Stone, there's not yet necessarily major plot points that are missed. It's more details, things that are changed, things that are, you know, just done a little bit differently. It's not huge pivotal plot points at this stage because these books are smaller, so the films were able to include more. It is going to be later on that we see the really big changes, but Again, as I said with Philosopher's Stone, because Chamber of Secrets is a smaller book, there's more that the TV series is going to be able to do. They will be able to include everything from the books because they have more time compared to the films, but they're also going to be able to go a bit further. They will probably add some things because they will have the time to do so. And again, as I said for Philosopher's Stone, I really hope they show us a bit more of this, the day-to-day Hogwarts life. Students going to lessons, showing more of the relationships, all of that. I really hope they show more of that. And as I said earlier, I really hope they do Ron a bit more justice throughout the whole series. Yeah, thank you so much for watching part 1. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up. I'd be so grateful. Let me know in the comments if there's anything you want them to include from Chamber of Secrets, things that were missed out or changed from the books and the films that you want there to be in the HBO series. So I'll see you next week for episode 4, which will be part 2 of the Chamber of Secrets deep dive. Thank you so much for being a part of Plot Portal, and I'll see you next week.